Now, one of the other big factors behind this whole problem, and based on the research that I did for the book over the last 18 months, probably the biggest contributing factor to this issue is what I call cognitive bias and gender stereotyping. And there's been a lot discussed around this. Some people know about it, some people have heard about it, some people don't know anything about it. But cognitive bias is driven by subconscious thinking, and it has an impact on how people observe and interpret and analyze whatever information their senses are taking in from the world around them. And it affects how they reach conclusions. In effect, each one of us constructs our own version of reality based on the inputs we're seeing. And my version of reality and someone else's version of reality and your version of reality may be all entirely different, even though we're getting more or less the same inputs. And that's because of the cognitive bias that's happened inside of us subconsciously. And bias starts at a very young age. Now, if we think about the nature versus nurture debate with children, newborn babies don't show any signs of cognitive bias. They simply take it in. Young children don't show any signs of cognitive bias. And yet the impact of bias starts at a very young age. There was a fascinating piece of research carried out by Lego, the Lego Toys company, and they found that young girls feel just as confident about engaging in all types of play as young boys, and yet they are held back by gender stereotypes. And those gender stereotypes are actually coming from the parents. So based on this research that Lego did, they found that parents are 5 times as likely to encourage girls over boys to engage in dance or dress-up activities, and more than 3 times as likely to do the same for cooking or baking. Adversely, parents are almost 4 times as likely to encourage boys over girls to engage in programming games and sports, and more than twice as likely to do so with coding toys. So it's something that's really pervasive throughout society, and it's going to take time for this to change. It's going to require a generational shift or two for this to really properly flow through, so that these kinds of inherent gender biases and gender stereotyping do not happen in future. And that's a really key thing for taking this forward. If we put this more into the context of the fundraising world, I'm going to refer to a study by a professor at the London Business School, Professor Dana Kanza, who did her PhD studies at Columbia University in New York. And during her research, her PhD research, her main thesis piece, she looked at every pitch done at the TechCrunch startup battles in New York City between 2010 and 2017. Every single pitch that was done, she analyzed the pitches and the Q&A sessions. And what she found was that there was no substantive difference between the way men pitched or women pitched. But where the real difference came was actually in the Q&A from the investors after their pitches. And what she found was that both male and female investors demonstrated a significant bias towards male founders who were pitching over female founders who were pitching. And it manifested itself through a different type of questioning. So male founders were 67% more likely to be asked what are called promotion questions. How are you going to double your market share? How are you going to expand your workforce? And 66% of women were more likely to be asked what are called prevention questions. How are you going to defend your market share? How are you going to stop the competition from stealing your employees? How are you going to protect the business? Men were asked about growth and strength of cash flow, and women were asked about margins and loss making. And it was just very, very strong and very, very stark to see that this bias was happening so consistently across a 7-year period, across thousands of pitches. And as I said, that female investors showed the same bias as male investors. So there's a fantastic TEDx talk by Professor Kanza. If you look it up, I think it's called The Real Reason Women Don't Get Funding, or something to that effect, but really, really excellent piece of research. So we've looked at how bad it is. We've talked about the fact that there are women who have done it, and there are many of them, and hopefully some of you are watching us, and hopefully some of you will be in the audience and in attendance. So there is a glimmer of hope. There is opportunity. There is a chance. And then we've seen the Dana Kanza research that helps to explain why. One of the other key things that came out of the Dana Kanza research was that women who were asked prevention questions and answered with promotion style responses were 14 times more likely to secure funding than if they answered with a prevention question. So it's kind of like the politicians, you know, they're asked a question and they don't answer the question, they put their message across. So if you find yourself in a pitching situation and you're getting a question from an investor that you identify is a prevention kind of question, take a moment and think about a promotion response to that question, because you're going to be significantly more likely to secure investment for your business.